Fantasy draft season is over. The regular season is here. We are getting you ready each and every week to set your lineup on the Radio.com Sports Fantasy Football Show. My name is Steven Andress. Let's kick it off. Let's start with our weekly waiver wire segment. In the words of the great Lloyd Christmas from Dumb and Dumber, pick 'em up. These are waiver wire options owned in fewer than 50% of leagues. Guys that at this point after the fantasy draft, but before week one, may have gone overlooked in your drafts, but with new information should be rostered in your leagues. So at running back, Justin Jackson. This is a situation with Melvin Gordon, who's in the middle of a contract holdout. We have no idea when that's going to end. At the time of this recording, he still has not reported to the Los Angeles Chargers. That doesn't mean Austin Eckler, the backup, is going to get all of the touches. They used him in tandem with Justin Jackson a year ago when Melvin Gordon was injured, and it is Justin Jackson who should get the goal line work in this offense. When you look at the 4 weeks towards the end of the year when Jackson saw more volume, he did well with it. 12.5 PPR points from week 13 to 16 a year ago. 3 of those 4 weeks were when Melvin Gordon was on the bench. That success should continue in 2019 for as many weeks as Melvin Gordon is out. Justin Jackson is a viable flex option and should be owned in leagues. Looking at the wide receiver options owned in fewer than 50% of leagues, there's only one name that stands out to me before the season starts, and it's Buffalo Bills wide receiver John Brown. They call him Smokey. He's fast. He was awesome last year in Baltimore in the first half of the season when Joe Flacco was the quarterback, a QB that likes to throw the ball deep. That changed completely when Lamar Jackson took over in Baltimore and didn't like to throw the ball and wasn't allowed to throw the ball much at all. Look at the splits in that time frame. John Brown from week 1 through week 9 with Joe Flacco at quarterback averaged 13.1 PPR fantasy points per game. From week 11 through 17 with Lamar Jackson at quarterback, plummeted to just 3.6 PPR fantasy points per game. Who does this quarterback now in Buffalo? It's the second-year, strong-armed quarterback Josh Allen, who is one of the bigger deep threat passers in the NFL in just his second season in the league. I like John Brown to bounce back with more of a Joe Flacco-type quarterback to start 2019. Let's move on to our next segment, the stream team. And what do we mean by streaming? If you're not familiar with that term, it means picking up a guy and starting him that week among the positions where you only have to start one guy, the quarterback, the tight end, the kicker, and the defense. We're going to look at QB, tight ends, and defenses this year because, frankly, you could plug anybody you want into kickers. It's not that much of a drop-off no matter who you pick. But quarterback, tight end, and defense is very different. Quarterbacks that could be streaming options in week 1 include Jameis Winston of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Look at his matchup to start the year. A home game against the 49ers, and how Jameis Winston is owned in fewer than 50% of leagues, I'll never know. He should be 100% owned with Bruce Arians now, the pass-happy head coach, taking over for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And that week 1 matchup against the 49ers, that's only one of 5 games with an over-under at sportsbooks of 50-plus points. That means there's an implied total of more than 25 points for this Bucs offense in week 1. And the 49ers last year were bottom 10 in the NFL in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Who's our next streaming option for week 1? It's the same game, the opposite team. It's San Francisco starter Jimmy Garoppolo, who was mostly undrafted this year in fantasy football. But I'm telling you, if you were one of the teams that had Andrew Luck and you're in need of a week 1 quarterback, look for Jameis Winston or Jimmy Garoppolo. For all the same reasons we just said about Jameis Winston, you can apply to Jimmy G as well. A high over-under at sportsbooks of 50-plus. That game's a pick'em game, so they have the same implied total does the 49ers offense of 25-plus points. Plus, the Bucs were bottom 3 in the NFL a year ago in fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. Moving on to streaming tight end options for week number 1, and we mentioned Andrew Luck's retirement. Well, with backup Jacoby Brissett now the starter, to me that makes Jack Doyle a viable streaming starter option for week 1. Why do I say that? Well, look back to the last time Jacoby Brissett was a starter for the Colts. He started the entire 2017 season in Indianapolis. What did Jack Doyle do that year? He had 80 receptions with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, and Eric Ebron's emergence last year was mostly because Jack Doyle was injured. He is back healthy now. The Colts were only ranked 16th in 3 wide receiver formations last year with Andrew Luck. That's a solid rate of formations with multiple tight ends, and that could be even higher now with a backup Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. The arrow is pointing up for Jack Doyle. I'm going really deep for this next tight end streaming option. It wasn't on anybody's radar during draft season, but if you're not comfortable with your matchup from the tight end you drafted, I think Will Dissly of the Seattle Seahawks is a viable streaming option in your normal leagues and even your DFS if you're looking for a cheap FanDuel or DraftKings option. Why do I like Will Dissly? Well, it's because the Seattle wide receiver core is banged up right now. DK Metcalf and David Moore were injured in the preseason. They're looking unlikely for week 1, and that leaves really only Tyler Lockett as a reliable, confident target for Russell Wilson against the Cincinnati Bengals. They have to throw to somebody, and the Seattle Seahawks are projected to score more than 26 points by odds makers at the sportsbooks week 1 against the Bengals. Somebody other than Tyler Lockett's got to catch the ball. Why not Will Dissly? Streaming options among defenses. Again, these are more options that are owned in fewer than 50% of leagues. And to me, one of those defenses is the number 1 ranked defense for week 1. It's the Baltimore Ravens. I can't believe they're owned in fewer than half of leagues, but they're taking on the Miami Dolphins to start the year, which is the best matchup you can possibly get to start 2019. The Dolphins were bottom 6 in fantasy points allowed to defenses last year. Their offensive line is atrocious. It's one of, if not the worst units in the NFL. And the Ravens led the league in offensive plays per game last year. So what's that got to do with their defense? Well, if their offense is on the field more than any team in the NFL, that means their defense is on the field for fewer plays than any team in the NFL, which means the opposing offense is on the field for fewer plays than any team in the NFL. The Miami Dolphins are bad. They're not going to be on the field much. They might turn it over when they are. All positive signs for the Ravens defense in week number 1. Our other streaming defense option is the Dallas Cowboys at home against the New York Giants, again owned in fewer than half of leagues. And it's not just because of the Giants matchup in week 1, it's because of the early season schedule for the Cowboys defense to allow you to keep a defense on your roster without having to pick any up for the next few weeks. Week 1 against the Giants at home, at Washington week 2, home against Miami week 3. Those are fantastic matchups for a fantasy defense to start the year. Our final segment of the show is Stealthy Starts. These are players that you may have drafted without the intention of putting into your starting lineup for week 1, but the matchup in week 1 is too attractive to leave them out of your starting lineup. So consider these guys even if you drafted somebody else ahead of this player. The first Stealthy Start is Tony Pollard, running back of the Dallas Cowboys. I know this is low-hanging fruit. It's an obvious one. If Ezekiel Elliott is out week 1, plug in Tony Pollard. But look deeper into it. It's not just the simple, if Zeke's out, plug in Tony Pollard. He's been really good in the preseason, and the Cowboys are a 7-point favorite with an elite offensive line, which should lead to positive game scripts. In other words, more rushing opportunities playing with a lead in the second half against the G-Men. He's an instant plug-and-play with Zeke out. The 4th-round rookie out of Memphis is a no-doubt starter, and it's reasonable to say that Pollard could continue to get work even when Zeke comes back. There are a lot of reports out of Dallas, including from our Dallas affiliate 105.3 The Fan, that Pollard could be used more as an Alvin Kamara, Chris Thompson satellite back type situation even when Zeke comes back. That's a guy I want to pick up and not only start right away, but keep on my roster moving forward even when Zeke comes back. The next Stealthy Start among running backs is a guy that I've been touting all offseason and preseason long. It's 49ers running back Matt Breida. Jerick McKinnon is still unable to get healthy from his ACL tear a year ago. And from all accounts in San Francisco, it's Matt Breida, not the more highly drafted Tevin Coleman, who is the better player in preseason for the 49ers. So don't ignore those reports. Matt Breida last year, even looking at the analytics, was better than what Tevin Coleman did in Atlanta. Per Football Outsiders a year ago, In success rate, Breida was ranked 30th among all running backs. Tevin Coleman was just 37th. In DVOA, Breida was 23rd. Coleman was 30th. DVOA stands for Defense Adjusted Value Over Average. That represents a value per play of what that running back brings over an average running back in the same game situations. And in receiving DVOA, Matt Breida was second among all running backs, and Coleman was 10th. Matt Breida is a viable, talented, multi-purpose, dual-threat running back that could be a great flex option and maybe more this season. Plug him in with confidence in Week 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Among wide receivers that are stealthy starts, Marvin Jones of the Detroit Lions. That target tree has shrunk in Detroit. Golden Tate is gone. They cut Theo Riddick, who was one of the highest volume pass-catching running backs in the NFL. That leaves Jones with just Kenny Golladay and running back Kerryon Johnson as viable pass-catching options for Matthew Stafford, maybe tight end TJ Hawkinson. But Marvin Jones last year averaged more than 8 targets per game once Golden Tate was traded and before he got hurt. In that Week 1 matchup at Arizona, the Lions are projected to score more than 25 points in that game, according to odds makers and sports books. This is a plus matchup for Marvin Jones. And we should also mention that Arizona's starting cornerbacks are both out for this game. Patrick Peterson has a 6-game suspension he must serve. Robert Alford on the other side has a leg injury. He will miss a few weeks to start the year. It's a green light for Marvin Jones in week number 1. Our last stealthy start is wide receiver Dede Westbrook of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And this is a guy who went under the radar for most of the preseason, and then week 3 came along, and Nick Foles threw 7 of his 10 passes to Dede Westbrook. He's going to be heavily targeted out of the slot, and he was one of the best slot receivers in the NFL a year ago. Per Next Gen Stats, Westbrook earned 3+ yards of separation on 74% of his targets. That was best among wide receivers a year ago. He also gained 5+ yards of separation on a league-leading 51% of targets. We mentioned what he did in week 3. We didn't mention his new offensive coordinator, John DeFilippo, who passed 67% of the time last year with the Vikings. The Jaguars only threw it 59% of the time a year ago. That should mean more targets for Westbrook to start the year. And what's his matchup? A home game against the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are going to put up points. We all know that, which means Jacksonville may have to play catch-up for a lot of this game and abandon the run and have more volume of pass attempts to start the year. These are all good signs for Dede Westbrook to start things off. Thank you so much for joining us this week on the Radio.com Sports Fantasy Football Show. Each and every week, we are going to get your starting lineups ready throughout the season. My name is Steven Andress. Best of luck to start the year.